Good morning, everybody. We apologize for the late start. This is Amanda Reverbray, the facilitator and producer for the event. I just quickly want to get started. We're getting a few things sorted on our end, but to get kicked off, I'm just going to quickly introduce the Minister, Robert Courts, and go ahead and start with his session. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We apologize for the late start. This is Amanda Reverbray, the facilitator and producer for the event. I just quickly want to get started. We're getting a few things sorted.
Happy New Year to all of you. I'm really pleased to be here, albeit virtually, to discuss some of the progress that the government and sector together have made on maritime autonomy this year, despite the challenges brought on by the global pandemic, and to kick off what promises to be a compelling day of discussion and debate. I must start by thanking you for your continued hard work to put the UK in such a strong position as we embark on this new year. And thank you to James Fanshawe for inviting me to speak to you today. Let me start briefly by touching on COVID-19. I've been hugely impressed by the achievements of the sector in these unprecedentedly difficult times. The critical role that our maritime sector plays for our country has been demonstrated time and time again, with the sector keeping the economy moving during lockdown and now transporting the vaccines and the medical supplies, which will help put us on a pathway to recovery. I'm hopeful that as a country, we can progress along that pathway quickly and start really delivering on the government's wider agenda, including making the most of the UK's strengths in technology, research and development. This year has driven home the importance of new technologies and the benefits of new ways of working together, because that's what's kept us connected with our work colleagues as well as our loved ones. But we cannot hope to achieve more of our aims, such as decarbonisation, without infrastructure and technology. We want to make the best use of new and developing technology to enable more efficient, resilient and greener working practices. The UK aims to be the world leader in design, manufacture, uptake and use of maritime autonomy and other innovative shipboard technologies. I'm immensely proud of the work and achievements in the technology by the maritime sector, particularly in automation. If we continue to work in partnership and to deliver our ambitions, I am confident that we will be the world leader in maritime technology, innovation and productivity in a way that strengthens the UK maritime business for the future. The government remains absolutely committed to our shared long-term vision as the maritime sector, which we saw set out in Maritime 2050. As you'll all know, Maritime 2050 builds upon previous strategies and sets out an ambitious vision for the sector, developing and adopting new technologies. The UK has an opportunity to become a centre for maritime research and development and to build our expertise in areas like autonomous and zero-emission shipping, and further to increase the capacity and flexibility to meet the challenges of tomorrow. The work of the Maritime Autonomous Systems Regulatory Working Group is a key contributor to achieving this vision. The updated version 4 of the Industry Code of Practice is a demonstration of the continued leadership that the UK provides on the global stage. And it encapsulates the commitment that you all have to the safe use of the autonomous and remotely operated vessels. So our goal remains to make the UK a major international hub for maritime autonomous technologies which meet the highest safety levels. 2020 saw continued developments in testing and operation of unmanned vessels in UK waters to take this work forward, and I know there's already projects being prepared to take place this year. 2020 also saw the publication of the Maritime Autonomy Regulation Lab, or MAR Lab report. This work represented the culmination of almost 2 years of intensive work between the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, the National Oceanography Centre and industry partners to explore the regulatory requirements for unmanned and autonomous vessels to operate in the UK and to support the UK's contribution to the work at the IMO. We all know that good regulation in this area is critical to the success of maritime autonomy. Safety must be our #1 priority, and poor or uncertain regulation can stifle innovation. So getting this right is a complicated but important task. I'm really pleased with the progress the MCA have made in developing a future regulatory regime, and you will hear more from Katrina Kemp from the MCA later on about the next step for their work. I know that you will all continue to support the MCA and their work over the course of the coming months. The UK government also continues to provide funding to support the research and development of the maritime autonomy. Last summer, we announced the 21 projects which have been funded through Maritime Research and Innovation UK, MARI UK. The variety and quality of these projects is groundbreaking, and it demonstrates the strengths of the UK's maritime sector. MARI UK have also recently launched a smart maritime land operations competition funded by the Department for Transport. This £1.35 million competition will fund technology development aimed at how ports will interact with smarter and more autonomous operations both at sea and on land. This will help develop a key link in the future transport chain. And on top of the work taking place by MARI UK, another exciting project taking place is the Belfast Maritime Consortium, led by Artemis Technologies, which has received £33 million of public funding from the Strength in Places Fund to develop zero-emission hydrofoiling ferries. The consortium shows the additional employment, skills and opportunity that new technologies can bring to local areas. All of these projects, funded by the government jointly with industry and academia, will help in the realisation of our shared vision, harnessing skills, investment and entrepreneurial spirit that we have in this country. And this will help us take a lead in the development of new maritime technologies within the UK that we will be able to sell right around the world. And of course, as you know, there are potentially significant environmental benefits from the uptake of new technologies, which will help in our collective battle against climate change. That's why the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, published in November, set out our ambitions for a green industrial revolution. This included the announcement of a £20 million fund for a competition to develop clean maritime technology, such as feasibility studies and technology trials on key sites. To be launched in the coming months, this will lay the foundation for a growing network of projects gearing up maritime decarbonisation in the UK. The battle to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and tackling climate change is becoming more urgent every year. That's why we've become the first advanced economy to make a legal commitment to net zero carbon emissions by the middle of this century. Every sector of our economy must play its part. That's why we also became one of the first countries to lay out precisely how we will address domestic greenhouse gas and pollutant emissions with the Clean Maritime Plan. This continues to be a critical focus of this government, and supporting the decarbonisation of the maritime sector will also help to create new skilled jobs and contribute to the economic recovery from COVID-19. We've achieved many successes, but we cannot rest on our laurels. The work that your organisations do and the discussions which will be had at this conference represent the future of the maritime sector. The government is committed to supporting the continued development of maritime autonomy in the UK and the necessary regulatory changes needed to enable the safe operation of these vessels. The progress made so far is worth celebrating, and in particular, the collaborative way in which it has been achieved. I ask that you continue with this cooperation with academia, with government and with each other, and I know you will. Let me finish by saying thank you for all you've achieved to date and the very best of luck for the continued successful development of the Industry Code of Practice. Thank you very much. I look forward to catching up with you soon. Good morning and a happy new year to all of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert, for that video. Would you like to share any few words or take some Q&A if anybody has any questions?
Well, everyone can see and hear me okay. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. I'm sorry it's remote. Never mind.
Well, let's see if we have any questions. For the attendees here, as a reminder, if you have any questions, there is a text-based Q&A, and so you could just type and chat your questions in. We receive them on our end, and therefore I can read those out to Robert. Let's see, we don't. I have one.
As well, so I've got the chat.
Perfect, Robert. I see one here. Some sectors have received high levels of government investment. Could the minister please expand on measures you are planning to raise the maritime levels, given the high impact of maintaining maritime trade flows?
Yeah, very good. So at the moment, of course, we're focused on COVID-19, which means that our spending review ambitions have been changed from a three-year, which for any longer term. So at the moment, we are looking at that short recovery piece. Doesn't mean that ambition abandoned, far from it. By the Maritime Administration. And that shows that we need to work on those return ambitions. We will need that 3-year spending review period in order to look at a longer term investment. But we are as absolutely committed as we always have been to Maritime 2050 and to the autonomous shipping development as well. You can see the investment in that so far.
Great. No other questions just yet, but we could definitely wait another minute or two.
We'll give people a second. It's quite a lot of speech there. So. So it might be helpful if I just kick things off really. But what's very helpful for me is just to understand from sector partners what their priorities are, so that I take that away. I'm a relatively new minister, as you'll know. I've been doing this now for since September, so 4 or 5 months. Incredibly diverse, forward-looking, innovative, ambitious sector, and I'm very keen that we take the opportunities of everything that we have here. So, there are a number of challenges that we face at the moment as a sector, and COVID is obviously a problem. But I'm very keen that instead of seeing purely as a recovery opportunity to build back better, and that's never true. Feels autonomy and shipping. Those both present challenges, but they also present enormous opportunities. And these are sectors in which we already have that. But we'll have to make sure to target our resources and our energy to the right areas. For me to hear from those. So perhaps by just asking someone here to just say, in terms of which, what were your top three things you'd like to see us doing?
Robert, while people answer that, you did have 2 questions come in. Cool. And so one was, does Brexit have any effects on innovation in the sector?
So Brexit is it's a process. It's a governance arrangement. It isn't a policy in and of itself. So Brexit presents opportunities, but it won't of itself provide the answers. But it does have an enormous chance for us around the particular rate. Because in order to succeed in the autonomy spec, it's not just a matter of investing. It's not a matter of just getting the hardware. It's also a matter about getting the regulation. And we have this huge opportunity to make sure that instead of having regulators 28 countries, have regulators that are intended for us, So of itself, Brexit doesn't have an effect one way or the other. It does provide us with an opportunity to regulation, provided it's approached. And again, that's why the engagement is so important, because it gives us the opportunity to make sure we do get. It's very technical stuff.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. What potential do you see for a shift from road to maritime transportation services to reduce congestion at ports and on the roads and to achieve overall reduction of emission levels?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. We've been thinking about quite a lot, because I quite like the fact that a lot of the we look back to some of the old provide some promise. And this is a really good example of that. Chance to take some of the freight off, stuff out of the road, start getting it out. So we're very keen. There are sustainable routes, direct waterborne out of cities, and then environmental benefit. Also for things like which is a big part of that as well. So we've got something called the freight graph, which is our investment piece, and we're very keen to hear interest from partners on relatively low. So if there's people out there who are interested in involved, please do, because it's something we're interested in as well. I do think the real possibility for quite, it's not just cities, it's coastal, and as we start looking at the developments, we start looking at offshore wind sector. There's a great deal together to decarbonise the autonomy and piece.
Great. Okay. We have a number of questions. Okay. Does the minister think that the government will seek to change UK maritime laws to support the continued growth of the UK mass economy before the international community laws change? And what is his plan to do this?
Yeah. So at the moment, I can't give specifics exactly transition period changes, but we do have the opportunity now to ensure that the laws that we live under are those that are right for our country and for our sector, and also with regards to regulation, as I've already said. That gives us the opportunity to make sure the regulatory environment is correct for autonomy, and also that we can invest in the way that we would like to. So we will absolutely look at that. We have these new freedoms, and it's right that we look at the way that we will use them in the fullest of time, but it won't be something we'll do immediately. It's not a knee-jerk process. It's important that we get the consultation right, and that we look across the field to see what is required. That will help. I think your question is more about the mass economy, the wider economy. I think they're very much interlinked. If we help the maritime economy, we will help the coastal communities, we will help the wider economy. So I think they're utterly interlinked in a modern world. And getting the regulations and the laws right to make the most of the freedoms we have is, in my view, absolutely essential.
Great. Okay, you mentioned $33 million of public funding going to the Belfast Consortium. Up until now, almost all public funding has only been permitted as matched funding. Now that we are out of the EC, will this limit be relaxed to provide larger percentage grants to industry?
So there's a number of different ways we can do this. Some of these will be EU state aid rules, some of them will be domestic rules, and we will have to look globally as what we're trying to do there. So without second guessing what the result of any such review of the way these processes works might be, it's something we could look at. We will always have the incentive of ensuring that government money is given, that the taxpayer gets the best, the most value from their pennies, and match funding is something historically has always been a good way of doing that, because it ensures that there's some viability, it ensures that the private sector is interested in whatever that project is. It shows there's some investor confidence as well. So historically that's often been the case. We'll have a chance to look at these things. Too early to say whether we've changed that at the moment, but historically that's the reason why that approach has been taken.
Okay. Given the levelling up agenda, how will investments in maritime benefit the whole of the UK?
Yeah, so you've put your finger on exactly the importance of all this. And I'm glad you've asked that question, because levelling up is what this government's all about. It's all about making sure that everybody, wherever they come from in this country, has the chance to make the very most of their talents, that no one's left behind, that as one part of the country benefits, so do others. And we in maritime sector we're really at the tip of the spear on this, because many of the coastal communities that we represent are those that haven't had haven't had the full benefit of a global world, haven't had a full benefit of the country's growth, and we have to make sure that that's the case. So You've got the investment in the coastal communities themselves. That helps through having a healthy, growing maritime economy. You also have the benefits of things like free ports, which is targeted investment and targeted government support to particular areas. But then you have the supply chain as well. So this is really important because this often gets forgotten, but it's a critical part of it, because the supply chain itself could be anywhere. So it needn't be in a coastal area, it could be anywhere throughout the UK. So we have the real opportunity here in ensuring when we place orders, all of us as a sector, when we sign contracts, we can always look at exactly how they're benefiting other areas. And we're very keen from a governmental perspective to ensure that anything that we do is spread throughout the benefits of anything we do is spread throughout the whole of the UK, coastal communities and wider afield.
Great. How are you addressing the training and certification for seafarers who've changed over to autonomous remote operation vessels? And is it important to maintain their sea time, be in a position to revalidate their qualifications?
Again, excellent point there. So with regards to sea time, I mean, I'll always defer to the expertise of sector with issues like that, but we will of course want to make sure that people maintain and retain the skills that they need in order to be effective. The thing from the government's perspective, well, firstly, before I get onto that, is your question's absolutely on the right point, because, and this is true across the entirety of the economy, what the UK really excels at is added value. It's where there's high-tech technologies, it's where there's something that's innovative, it's the people in short terms. That's what we're really good at. It's the clever stuff. And that is never more the case than the fields of maritime, never more the case than the field of autonomy. But those people need investing in, and you need skills. And across the whole of the sector, the whole of the economy, not just the sector, one of the big challenges is making sure we have enough people of the right skill set in order to make the most of the opportunities that we have. So you've got to retain them, you've got to train them, and then you've got to get more in. So that's a major challenge. But one of the things we're looking at is the Maritime Skills Commission, which we've set up, and that is looking to make sure we have people of the right skill set. So that very much will help. So Maritime Skills Commission, focusing on skills. There's also very much an education side of things as well. So, you know, all of us have got to work with our local schools and our local colleges to make sure that you have the technical STEM education that you need. This is outside of my brief, of course, but I think it's important because you've got to get people young. And I think there's an important issue there for the sector as well, because the more that the sector infuses people, and I'm looking at the sorts of people that we have here on the call today, the more you can infuse people at a very young age at getting involved in the sorts of technical high-tech stuff that you do, the more likely it is we're going to have the skill sets that we need. Because young people, of course, you know, people become interested in something relatively young, relatively early on in life, and we've got to make sure that they get interested in high-tech and technological things at an early age. So a number of pieces to it. As ever, it's never a straightforward answer. We're doing our bit by investing in the Maritime Skills Commission in particular, but there's a piece for all of us, from schools, colleges, but also sector, and in making sure we inspire the next generation of people who will be working in maritime.
Awesome. Robert, there actually are a number more questions, but the good thing is, unfortunately, with so many great speakers, we have to move forward to the next speaker. However, for everybody here, what we can do to rest assured, we extract all of these questions and we'll get those sent to the client, and therefore, whether it's some sort of communication from you or them to answer those questions after, we will get that to you guys.
Have a chance to reach your questions today. Please do make sure they're in the chat or email them.
Yes.
Get them sent to the department, and I'll write back. And perhaps if I write back, I can write back individually or to the conference as a whole, as is preferred. But I'll make sure you do get an answer. And thanks everybody for your engagement today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you. It's great to see you all. Have a great rest of the conference, and I look forward to catching up with your conclusions in due course. Take care.
Okay. I'm now going to move forward with our next presentation, and that's going to go from Dr. Katrina Kemp. In just one second, Dr. Katrina, you will see your PowerPoint. You are all set to go. We're ready when you are.
Brilliant. Good morning, and thank you very much. And thank you also to the Minister for setting the scene. I think that sets out the UK position really quite nicely. What I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes or so, technology permitting, is to give you some more details on some of what we're up to in terms of maritime policy. and also build on some of the questions I've spotted you've been asking. So hopefully some of those I'll answer in the presentation, and if not, I'm happy to build on those at the end. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is I'll start where we left off last year. Last year we were telling you a bit about MARLab and what we were up to. As the Minister has just said, we have now completed that project. So I'd like to tell you a bit about what we've been up to, what we've achieved. I'll then move on to tell you about the new Maritime Future Technologies team that has been established, our role and what that will be up to, what that team is up to. I will then explain what we're actually doing at the moment, and then obviously talk about some of the bigger next steps we need to be taking. And they won't be immediate answers, but they're more the longer term questions and issues that we need to be addressing. So next slide, please. So I think it's really important to say thank you. Everybody that was involved in the MARLab, thank you, whether you were interviewed, whether you were involved as a partner, whether you're involved in the original bid that we put together for the funding. Everybody has contributed really valuably, and if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be in the position we are now to have accelerated our understanding of autonomy and moved forward and been able to actually work with industry in the way we are at the moment. So what I want to do now is to show you, you won't have to listen to me for a little while, but show you a short video that we have put together about the MARLab project. Some of you may have seen this before, but I'm aware that we had quite a small audience last time. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And if you have pressed go, this will tell you about MARLab and what we have been up to.
I'm just going to have to give me 1 second to reshare with audio. 1 second here. Okay.
Welcome to MARLab, the UK's Maritime and Coast Guard Agency's Maritime Autonomy Regulation Labs. MARLab was formed in 2018 after the MCA won a Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy funding bid. MARLab then began the pioneering work of looking into the regulation for marine autonomous surface ships, otherwise known as MASS. MARLab set out to explore the regulatory barriers that face the testing and operation of MASS in UK waters, to scope innovative ways to regulate collaboratively and inclusively using a series of tools and methodologies, to support a relatively new but fast evolving technology industry, and to work toward ensuring MASS is included in regulation. MARLab is an MCA project with the following partners: Solis Marine Consultants, the Cabinet Office's Policy Lab, and the National Oceanography Centre, all chosen for their extensive expertise and experience in their fields. Solis Marine Consultants have been managing the data stream element of the MARLab work. Together with their partner Maritime, they have developed a data portal with data from various government sources that industry could access and use. The data portal demonstrated how multiple data sources from a port can be consolidated into a single location, making them available for MASS to access the data on demand. The system, which has been developed as a minimum viable product test case, is designed to demonstrate the concept of a data hub to help make the testing of autonomous vessels in UK waters safe for everyone, to give MASS developers access to the test hub and the datasets available through it, enabling MARLab to gather valuable industry stakeholder feedback, to explore system architecture and technology solutions for full-scale development, and to identify potential design considerations or sticking points. The Cabinet Office's Policy Lab has been working with MCA to understand the current regulatory landscape and develop a body of evidence to understand whether and where regulations need to be more permissible. They also work to identify regulatory barriers and challenges and how they can be potentially mitigated or eliminated. part of their work to date, Policy Lab has interviewed over 40 organisations both across the UK and internationally, created a series of speculative maritime signal flags as part of an exhibition at the London International Shipping Week 2019. This communication tool was used to engage wider stakeholders, developed a maritime regulatory map for MAS, and a MAS activities and stakeholder network map. These provide valuable insights for the MCA, and conducted workshops with policy officials and industry to stress test possible regulatory changes using scenarios and risks. The serious game revealed new issues and new solutions, and is a technique the MCA are keen to use again in the future. MARLab's final partner is the National Oceanography Centre, otherwise known as the NOC, drawing together a team including master mariners, experts in marine law, and its own internal experts. The NOC has conducted a detailed review of the Merchant Shipping Act and the relevant statutory instruments. These studies have made 18 recommendations for supporting the legal framework required for MAS in the UK, advised the MCA on how the Workboat Code version 2 could be modified to support MAS, and generated early concepts for necessary equipment that MAS should carry. MARLab's 2019-2020 work is currently under review within the MCA. The next steps are yet to be agreed. In the meantime, the NOC continues to support the MCA as it develops the legal framework for MAS. Solus Marine Consultants and Maritrace's data portal continues to be operational, maintained and utilised by industry. Their consultation reports are under review, helping MCA to ascertain the data and regulatory needs from industry. And finally, Policy Lab's interactive outputs such as the MAS stakeholder map, regulatory maps, and workshop tools will continue to be used.
If I could have the next slide, please. Okay. So as you can see, we've done a lot over the last 2 years, and that was down to all the hard work of the various partners, and I'm very grateful for that. And I will talk in a bit about some of the work that's come out of this. For example, the legal reviews that have led to us feeding into updating the Workboat Code, and the evidence discoveries that we've been using to identify ways forward and new areas to explore. One update I would like to provide is in relation to the data portal. Unfortunately, this was something the MCA felt we were unable to continue to support, even though there is some value in it for the industry. What we are doing, though, is taking the report that Solus have provided, and we will be identifying areas that we need to research further and identify how that needs to be updated in regulation if required. So the work there is, everything that has been done has been useful for us and has been really important in accelerating us into the current position. So the other element that came out of this is really quite important and quite exciting from my perspective, is that actually we have formed a new team. We formed the Maritime Futures Technologies team, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the purpose of that team and what they're up to, because in some ways it's as a result of MARLab and the work it's done that this team now exists to continue the work of MARLab and continue that acceleration of input onto the regulation of autonomy. Next slide, please. So the Maritime Future Technologies team has two particular focuses at the moment. One is emissions reduction and the other is autonomy. Over the last 6 months, we've been building the capability and capacity of that team, and we now almost have 2 complete sides, that one focuses on autonomy and one that is able to focus on the emissions reduction, and both work in a very similar way in terms of supporting case-by-case projects that are emerging, accelerating the MCA's thinking about these innovative areas, It's also important to note that we're mapping what are very complex stakeholder landscapes in both areas, and some of the work of MARLab is supporting the autonomy side of this, and the emissions reduction side is being developed as we speak. The other part of that is to ensure that those relationships, it's not just a map, that actually we have relationships with these companies and individuals and areas of industry, and that's what's really important for us to take our work forward. The other elements that we are doing is actually supporting the update of regulation and formalising collaborative partnerships where that's possible and where that will gain benefit to ourselves and the industry. Next slide, please. So what do the team do? In three simple words: we facilitate, we support, and we influence. As most of you will have encountered, we facilitate the implementation of projects. And this is something on the autonomy side we've been doing for a number of years now, but we now have a slightly larger team, and we're able to do that beyond my normal working capacity, which you'll be pleased to hear. So we will continue to facilitate projects on a case-by-case basis. And we will act as the focal point between yourselves and the various policy leads that we need to engage with to support your project and get it out on the water. We also support regulatory change. We're able to take all that research that we've done as part of MARLab and the experience that we learn from working with you and your projects, and actually take that forward to identify where and how regulatory change needs to take place. And that can happen in the shorter term, but also will happen in the longer term, where we support the IMO at the international level. And finally, influence change. In particular, as part of the emissions reduction, it's important for us to start providing some direction on where we are able to support projects and which technologies are going to be most use and assistance and are most viable. So this is the influence change part, is particularly on the emissions reduction, but it is part of what the entire team is up to. Next slide, please. And all of this, which I hope isn't a surprise to you, supports the delivery of Maritime 2050, about making maritime cleaner, safer and more efficient sector. And I think it's important to remember that, as the Minister pointed out, the MCA and DFT work very closely on this, and this is our ambition and these are our goals. So what now? Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I said, the team will continue to support those individual projects. There are more of us to be able to do that, which will help you rather than things getting lost in my inbox, as I'm sure most people are aware happens. Some of the other work that we're doing that actually really will support the industry on the longer term is the update of the workboat code. And we've been able to do this because of the legal reviews that came out of the MARLab project. But we've also been able to do this because of a general update to the workboat code that is already taking place. And we have been able to pull together our experience of the certification of remotely operated vessels. And what we are doing is drawing together an annex that will be part of the workboat code that will detail those requirements for a remotely operated vessel under 24 metres. We are still drafting this. However, we are making huge progress, possibly because we have, or because of the current environmental situation, which means actually we're all sort of working from home and working remotely, has had this odd effect of actually speeding us up on some of these aspects, but also because of the information we've received. So as part of that, there will be a consultation. I noticed there was a question about this earlier. There will be a consultation period once that draft is completed. I can't commit to what the timelines are, but you will be involved. And one of the really interesting things that came out of the MARLab project was also an exploration of how we consult. How do we ensure the regulations we're making are actually practical, actually work, are actually holistic? So as you can see on the screen here, there is a photograph of us testing a consultation method using scenario-based process. And the idea is that we walk a sample of regulations through a particular scenario with industry. In this case, we were testing it with a range of policy leads to identify whether the regulations we're proposing cover the different eventualities and actually are practical. What we hope to do as part of the consultation of the workboat code, in particular the annex or remote operation, is to use some of those techniques that were developed as part of the MARLab through our partners, the Policy Lab, Cabinet Office's Policy Lab team. So hopefully in the future, we will invite you to some of those sessions. They're not your traditional going line by line through the code of practice, but it will help us to understand if there are areas we need to develop further. So as well as focusing our attention on the workboat code, we also have plans to publish a maritime information note, because we're aware that updating the workboat code will take time. The maritime information note will lay out what our policy and approaches, that is case-by-case support for individual projects. We will also provide details of safety case approaches. For those projects that are innovative, we need the evidence to provide any exemptions if that's the route we are going down. And for us at the moment, the safety case approach provides that evidence and allows us to ensure that what we're doing and what you're doing is safe. Okay, next slide, please. So that's what we're up to now. Workboat code, MIN. But obviously, this has all been focused on under 24 metres. There will be bigger questions. There are things to come. We still need to consider the over 24 metre vessels. The larger vessels, the projects that are already out there that are exploring beyond this size, whether that's remotely operated or whether that's fully autonomous, artificial intelligence, terms such as machine learning are coming up. These all present new challenges for us as a regulator. The other areas we also need to do, and we still need to conduct research in lots of different aspects to ensure that we understand what's coming in the future, but also to understand the full extent and impact that will have on the regulation. Whether that's an over 24 metre vessel that's remotely operated, whether it's fully autonomous, whether it's wanting to carry dangerous goods, whether it's automating the cargo elements. There's so much more that we need to be exploring to ensure we keep up with the projects that I'm fairly sure you're going to be telling us about over the next 2 days. And if you don't tell us about them in the presentations, I'm sure there will be chat about them in the networking sessions. We also need to explore carefully data. Data is vitally important with the communication between a remote operator and a vessel at sea, or between a fully autonomous vessel and an individual monitoring that. And we need to explore the capabilities and the regulations from a, for example, workboat code perspective, but also from a radio communication legislation perspective as well. So there's lots there for us to explore in the future. So as much as this is just 4 images, there's actually a huge amount of work behind it. And we're aware of this, and these will be coming in future years as part of our longer term strategy about how we continue to support the industry and update the regulations as and when we're able to. If I could have the next slide, please. So, the IMO. As many of you know, and I'm hoping this isn't a surprise, IMO meetings were considerably different last year. We weren't able to meet in person. Most meetings have gone online. But obviously, because they've gone online, there's a reduction in the amount of information and discussion that can take place. And quite rightly, autonomy was postponed, or the discussions on autonomy were postponed. There were other high priorities that needed to be discussed in relation to seafarer welfare and other matters. However, you will hopefully be pleased to know maritime autonomy, surface ships are back on the agenda. And at the May MSC, we will be discussing, or we'll be recommencing our discussions on maritime autonomy. Obviously, the plan originally was to complete the regulatory scoping exercise in 2020. I can make no promises as to whether we will complete that this year, but there are at least discussions at IMO this May. What I can do is reassure you that from our perspective, we have continued to engage with our international partners and like-minded states to talk about autonomy, to talk about how we move it forward. because we're all aware that regardless of whether the discussions have happened at the IMO, the industry continues to move. There may be slight delays because of COVID, but you are still moving forward. You are still pushing that innovation. You are still working on those projects, and we need to keep up. So that's why it's been really important for us to engage with other countries and other regulators about how we can take this forward. What it does mean is that when we do go to IMO, I believe we will be in a stronger position. We have more experience, we have more examples that we can bring to the table and explain why we think regulation needs to be changed in a particular way. And we also have that experience of updating and working on our domestic regulation as well, which is really important. And one thing that all of this needs to be is to continue to be flexible. I'm very aware that talking about updating regulation looks like we're putting a mark in the sand, which we are doing, but we're doing it in such a way that it continues to support the industry with a level of flexibility, because we're aware that technology is changing. We're aware that it moves very quickly, and it's important that we don't write regulation that as soon as it comes into force is potentially out of date. So this is one of the key things that we will continue to push. So autonomy is back on the agenda at the IMO. Next slide, please. So finally, as I always say, I think this is my standard last slide, but you'll notice there's a few extra names on it this year. Talk to us, engage with us early. We have a slightly larger team now. There is myself, there's Ruth Taylor, and there's also Robert Gale. And we want to engage with you. We want to talk about the projects. The sooner you come to us, the sooner it gives us the heads up that something is on the agenda. It's easier for us to be able to consider your project at a very early stage and identify any regulatory barriers and work at a pace that fits in with other MCA priorities. And it's easier for us to do that than you knocking on the door and saying, I'd like to put my boat on the water next week. We need time to consider the implications of the project and the proposals. So my message, as always, is please engage with us, talk to us. Our emails are on the screen, and obviously you can ask questions, and I think most of you are in contact with me anyway. Next slide, please. Finally, thank you for listening. I hope you heard it all, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Katrina, it's James. I wonder if you can actually hear me now.
I can indeed.
Oh, great. Well, to all of you out there, I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get up online, but Teams conspired against me. But we seem to have got off to a flying start, and you're the only person I know, Katrina, who puts two thank you slides in her presentation.
Why not?
Well, indeed so. Right, there's a question here which I hope I'm going to publish, as it were. This is from Roland Rogers. In a recent workshop on the potential outputs of the UN Decade of the Ocean, Craig McLean, the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Research at NOAA, highlighted that the future safe ops of MASS were dependent on enhanced maritime weather forecasts above those already provided. What is the UK MCA's view that safe ops can only be achieved through enhanced weather forecast? And if it agrees, how will it go about setting this change? Says Roland Rogers.
Well, thank you, Rowley. You can always rely on someone to give you a nice meaty question to get your teeth in to start with. So from my perspective, yes, the weather forecasts are going to be important. However, I'm not sure they're going to be the only aspect that ensures we achieve safe operations. So the MCA has its own meteorological and hydrographic team, and this will be conversations that I have with them about what weather forecasting we expect a remotely operated vessel or a remote operator to have access to ensure they can conduct safe operations. Whether in terms of about actually setting about the change, I think that's whether that comes into a regulation, whether it's something we stipulate that needs to be available to remote operators. And those discussions are still ongoing because there will be other data and other information that remote operators need access to, as well as the weather forecast.
Okay, thanks. Question from George Tuckey. In relation to the video you showed, data exploitation, collection, storage, analysis and visualization is currently a niche skill set within the maritime industry. What are MARLAB planning to address this?
So in terms of the data visualization aspect, unfortunately, that was something the MCA are unable to continue with. We felt that it was important for us to explore as part of the funding we received, and it wasn't just about the visualization of that data. It was about how we use government data and about any themes and issues that we need to be looking at from a regulatory perspective. I think there is other areas of that data and the importance of it that we do need to be exploring, but it won't be in that format. But that's not to say let's rephrase that. We would support industry exploring this further themselves. But when I say support, that doesn't necessarily mean we have money to support you, but we support it as a theme that needs to be looking into.
Okay, thank you very much. A question now regarding training the next generation of seafarers. How can maritime education and training providers get involved to ensure that our curriculum is future-proof, says Alina Prilipko.
So one of the we have a project that we are working on with our seafarer safety team, our seafarer training team, sorry, in relation to education of seafarers. And as part of that, that's a much bigger project, and that's being led by another member of our team. But from my perspective, it's also part of how we put that information into, for example, the workboat code. So training centres can be involved. I'm not sure exactly how at the moment, and I will do some research and get back to. Sorry, I missed the name. I will get back to that question and provide some more details if we can. But I think it's about ensuring we get feedback from everybody, and that actually we're engaging with these different areas to ensure that actually we can provide better regulation at the end of the day, and that seafarers do have the training they need to be operating these vessels or monitoring these more fully autonomous vessels.
Okay, and finally, in this Q&A session, and I should stress that all the speakers will be back for a panel later on. Phil Buckley has asked, do we properly understand the role of technology in autonomy yet? There's a question. Digitalization of shipping generally is a big subject, but has a number of challenges. The privacy dilemma and local or global networks, data ownership, tracking of people, cargo, shipping, etc. Do we yet know whether we can modify the current regulation suite, or do we need a completely different approach? Katrina.
So this is a brilliant question. I think there is still, in autonomy generally, and this isn't unique to the maritime sector from what I've gathered in recent conferences, there is still a lot for us to learn and understand about technology and autonomy. And actually safety critical autonomy, and I think that's quite important to stress, that for us as maritime, we're not just talking about automating something that supports us, we're automating something that is safety critical. I think it's really important to highlight that. In terms of, and that's where we need to work as a government agency with other government departments that maybe specialise in this and are also looking at this, whether that's the aviation industry, the rail industry, other industries beyond transport as well. In terms of knowing whether we can modify the current regulation suite or whether we need a completely different approach, you'll be pleased to know that as part of the Maritime Future Technologies team, we have a regulatory approach aspect that is looking at this. It looks at the approach we need to take, whether that can be amending regulations or whether we need a different set, not necessarily a set of rules, but a different approach to developing those. At the moment, though, it's worth remembering that our maritime regulation isn't just unique to the UK. It has to fit in with an international framework. So there will be limitations as to what we can do within that, but it is definitely something we are considering.
Katrina, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your answers. I think there may be one or two others, and we'll make sure that you get the name of Alina Prilipko, if I pronounced it right, for the one that you couldn't remember the name of. If you can see the questions, you should see her name there. Listen, the MCA are doing a huge amount of work along with other flag states around the world. And it's worth saying that if they're all there, there are over 300 people on the web today with us from about 30 different countries. So it just shows the level of interest and engagement. But the MCA is definitely leading the way. Thank you very much indeed. And we're going to move on to our next topic now, which is a vitally important one. Everywhere I go, I hear talk about cyber security, and people talk a lot about it, people write a lot about it, but one of the experts is the Chief Technical Officer for Netitude, and he's now going to give us a presentation on practical cybersecurity challenges and, in inverted commas, opportunities in shipping. So Ben Densham, his CV is on the web. If you haven't found the right place yet, have a look under speakers. You'll find everybody's present CVs and their photos. So over to you, please, Ben.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, James, for the welcome and the opportunity to speak this morning. As we've said, the subject today is looking at cybersecurity. Just a very quick introduction from myself. I work for a company called Netitude. We are part of the Lloyd's Register Group. Netitude was acquired by the Lloyd's Register Group about 2.5–3 years ago now. We've been very focused on cybersecurity in many different sectors, not just shipping and marine and offshore, but also in the financial services, critical national infrastructure, and many areas. So we bring a lot of experience from other sectors and have worked with lots of those areas. But hopefully the subject today is very much thinking about this in the context of marine and offshore, and particularly obviously in the context of autonomy, and a vital area, as James has outlined. So if we could have the next slide, please. So really just want to do 3 things. First of all, give you a little bit of an update in terms of the state of the nation. So what is it like out there? What sort of things are happening? What do we need to be concerned about? Is this all hype and scariness, or is it things that we actually need to have a solid understanding about? And also just give a few perceptions of things that we've seen from the industry with recent conversations and our involvement with the sector. A very quick look at regulations. Others have spoken about this a bit already, but just to highlight where cybersecurity sits and the focus around that. And then really just look at the considerations we need to be thinking about moving forward. So what does cyber mean? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And where do we need to go from that? And then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. So next slide, please. And the next one as well. Great. So I think when you look at the sector, there's a number of different drivers that really change the cybersecurity story when you start to consider it. So the graphic on the screen there shows some of these. So cyber attacks have increased. And if you look back over the last few years, there's been a whole range of different attacks that have taken place and are becoming more and more targeted within the sector. We've published some reports on our website that have looked at some of the phishing campaigns that have taken place, which have been very specific towards certain operations and activities within the sector. Very believable, credible messages that people are getting that look like they're coming from legitimate organizations and people, but in actual fact are malicious users trying to scam people into clicking on links or downloading software so that attackers can get a foothold into their network for a whole variety of different reasons, which we'll look at in a moment. But cyber attacks are here to stay. They are things that make money. They are things that people can cause a big impact from, and it's something we need to be very aware of, even if it's just something as simple as a ransomware attack, which is designed to take your systems out and offline so you can be held to ransom until you pay some money or some Bitcoin over, or right through to targeted attacks where they're specifically coming after your organization or your people or your data for a particular reason. COVID-19 has also seen a massive uptick. People see these things as an opportunity. as people have changed the way they do business by remote working, things that were done historically in a certain way by maybe visiting a vessel or going on board, now things have had to change quickly, and the bad guys have used that as an opportunity to infiltrate the systems with messages or try different lines of attack in terms of their phishing emails to make use of that and play on the disruption that's happened within that sector because of this event. As we know, the whole sector is going through a digital transformation, and we'll look at autonomy in a moment and how that is impacted. But as we start to think about how we move things online, how we do business in a more online and connected and collaborative way, that inevitably opens up the attack surface. It gives more opportunities for hackers and malicious users to infiltrate our systems and cause an impact that in the historic days just wouldn't have been possible, because systems wouldn't have been online and wouldn't have had such an extensive attack surface that they do today. Port security is a big one as well. There's a lot of focus and a lot of effort that's going into securing ports. Organisations around the world are putting some significant efforts into this. We've seen big advancements both in the US and in Singapore this year, with some quite advanced port security being implemented at in different countries and different organisations at a national level. Understanding how those systems and all the impacts that can be caused through the logistics that are managed there is another great opportunity for hackers, but one that we need to be considering and whereabouts. Regulation insurance, I won't dwell on that too much, but again, there's focus and there's lots of work going on in that area. Operators are beginning to get more and more mature in their understanding about the concerns and the things that need to be asked, the questions that need to be considered. So if you're a charterer and you're going off and you're trying to charter a set of vessels, understanding that you need to do that in a secure way and asking questions to people about, well, how do you secure your vessels? How do your crew understand security? We're seeing more and more of those conversations taking place, which is good. And then manufacturers as well. This is a big area, and we'll talk about it in a moment in terms of supply chain, which a couple of the other speakers have already touched on. But building cybersecurity into your development life cycles and considering how that needs to be done, both from the design and the configuration perspective, but also from the operational maintenance perspective, is a key concern and one that needs to improve within the sector generally. But I think one of the things we need to think about, and is one of the challenges that we see across this sector, is thinking about security, not compliance. We're very used to having bits of paper that certify us for things. We've gone through this assessment and that is ticked off. We've got the piece of paper, we're done. Security is not like that. It's an ongoing need. And it's something that needs to be maintained and it needs to be managed properly moving forwards. So we simply approach this as a tick box exercise. Are we doing these set of things? We're going to find that our operational security is not really in the right place. And certainly the agility of how the threat surface and the attack surface can change very rapidly means that we need to have those operational elements in. So it's all about if it happens, not if it happens to me, but when it happens. And when it happens, how well prepared are we? Do we know what would happen? Are we prepared to deal with it and manage that? If we approach it from the perspective that it will happen and we need to be ready, we take a very different mindset than trying to protect ourselves with the view that it will never happen to be moving forwards. Okay, if we have the next slide, please. So as we focused on autonomy, there are certain specifics here that really do drive the conversation and show the importance of cybersecurity. There's organisations who are looking at autonomy from the ground up, so very innovative, cutting-edge stuff where we're designing and implementing vessels that are designed to be completely autonomous, and obviously, hopefully, that's an aim for the future. But as we think about that, some of the subjects on the screen here are the ones that are being considered and are being built and implemented into those systems and those considerations. Whether it's artificial intelligence, the impact of having multiple, and in some cases thousands of sensors that are providing data back that provide that situational awareness for the systems that operate these vessels. Connectivity is absolutely critical. When you've got an autonomous vessel and you're operating that, the connectivity and the security of that connectivity is clearly the lifeblood of that system. Managing things through digital twins and the management of the actual operational environments. as well as thinking about energy management and the environment and how that is being impacted. All of these areas are driving specific needs and specific technology, specific innovation, but underlying all of those is the cybersecurity concerns and needs. So we need to make sure that our connectivity is done in a secure way. We need to make sure our understanding and implementation and the decisions that are made around artificial intelligence is done in a secure way. We need to understand how if we're building digital twins to manage operational aspects or maintenance programs or whatever it might be, we need to understand the impact of cybersecurity events upon that and how that can be built in. So don't see cybersecurity as another bucket, something to be considered, but really see this holistically that covers all these areas. And whatever conversation you're having in whichever of these areas, make sure there's a cybersecurity conversation going in parallel to ensure that those things will be considered at the right stage within the life cycle there. Okay, next slide, please. One of the things that we do consider a lot in this area is automation and remote connectivity. And I think in some ways you can consider them as two different problems. For many people, it's not about getting a completely autonomous vessel. We are working with a couple of organizations who are looking to do that, and they're building from the ground up vessels that are going to be designed from the outset to be autonomous. But for many people, it's really taking a much slower approach. So you may have existing vessels and platforms and fleets, and what you're aiming to do is to change a particular system to make it autonomous, or start to make part of that platform into a way that can be autonomous, that can either aid decisions or streamline or make efficiencies within the operation of that vessel. So as we think about that, we don't want to just be thinking about the autonomy side. We also need to think about the remote connectivity. And for many people, we've seen that conversation sometimes be a bit disjointed. So in other words, the consideration is around the functions, the features, and what the autonomy is going to do. And then the remote connectivity is almost an afterthought. Yes, of course, we can make that secure. That will just happen. It will use a system that is in place already or has been considered by somebody else or somewhere else. But I guess the message here really is to think about both and think about it holistically. How we connect in and how we manage that and do that is vitally important. For many people, it's not just simply a point-to-point connection. There are a myriad of third parties and cloud-based systems and quite a complex set of data flows that need to be managed between the vessel and the operations team or the systems that are managing that onshore or in other locations. So having a very clear understanding of how this works, how the connectivity is put in place, and how that data is being transferred and moved around is really key. And as I say, it's not just about designing vessels from the ground up. This is about implementing autonomy into existing fleets. And that's very often where a lot of the conversations are starting for many people. Okay, if we can have the next slide, please. So I think one of the things that we can think about is a journey over time. So, obviously at one end of the spectrum, we have fully autonomous vessels, and we hope that in the future will be something that will be widespread and something that will be that we're aiming at. But before we get there, there's a whole sequence of things that you go through in terms of that journey. And again, building cybersecurity and the concerns and the considerations in at each stage is really key. So making sure that the architecture, the operating model, thinking about the usability, the third parties, the organizations that are going to be involved in designing and building, how are you going to be able to monitor if an event was to happen in the future that would be part of a cyber attack? How are you going to be aware that that's happening? And if you do experience a cyber attack within the system, how are you going to protect yourselves from the impacts that could lead to? Can you get the monitoring in place so you can then react and recover and contain that and then recover from that so that you could withstand that type of event? Again, if you set out with that mindset that it will happen and you play out those scenarios throughout all of the conversations and considerations you have, then you're going to be in the right place to be able to actually ensure you're dealing with the risks that are being presented because of that. Okay, next slide, please. So when we think about this, we think about our threat surface, and this is really the area where the opportunity is for the attacker to have an impact upon your systems. And obviously, as we increase our connectivity, as we increase the systems that talk, as we increase the number of third parties that are involved in our processes, our threat surface is increasing. Therefore, the opportunity for somebody to do something is also increasing. So as that goes up, we need to be considering that, and we need to be thinking about that. There's lots of motivations why threat actors might want to cause an impact, you know, you can pan these out across your own organisations and think about the impacts upon these sorts of things. It may be access to sensitive systems and data. It might be cyber espionage. We've talked about ransomware already. Ransomware is something that impacts people indiscriminately. So you may not even be thinking that you might be specifically targeted, but because of the way you've designed your systems, that might be something you get caught up in if you're not aware of it and protecting yourselves from how that could cause a problem. There's things like denial of service, where people are trying to take you out from an operational perspective. And obviously within an autonomous vessel, if you can stop those communications and that ability for somebody to step into that loop and do something from a human perspective, then you can cause a big impact clearly. And obviously the ability to misdirect. So where we're carrying cargoes, we're trying to steal it, we're trying to cause an impact from it, from a terrorism perspective, from a criminal perspective, from a theft perspective, or simply from disruption and chaos. Many of these reasons and motivations exist within those threats. So one of the things that we'd encourage people to do is to think about your environment from a threat perspective. So think about who potentially could come at you. Think about how they could come at you, because that is the opportunity that is presented, and that is the means by which they would be likely to do it. And think about the likelihood. So just because something is possible, it doesn't mean it's likely. You need to be considering that. But if you think about it from a threat perspective, it really helps you to quantify the level of risk that you're really facing. And there's lots of ways and programs and assessment methods by which you can do that that are particularly focused from a cyber perspective. It can be very difficult, because one of the things that is really challenging in this area is that if you start talking to the techies, very quickly you can be overloaded with acronyms and technical language and things that actually are just very difficult to understand if you're not familiar with them. So being able to understand it from a business perspective and thinking about those threats from an impact upon your systems, your fleets, your organizations, your data, your cargo, your clients, whatever it might be, is the right way to consider it. We can then go and talk to the techies about what we need to do about those impacts once we have understood that from the business perspective. Okay, next slide, please. One of there's many considerations we could have pulled out, but the one I've particularly chosen to really focus on today is the supply chain. It's been mentioned already in the talks that we've heard about this morning, but it's a significant one for organisations who are building and planning autonomous vessels and systems. We generally don't have a single company that can do this. We need to get a collaboration and a consortium together, and there are many people that are then part of that process. So managing supply chain risk within cybersecurity is a big area, and if we look at other sectors, this is not unique to our sector. This is unique to this is common to many areas where supply chains are big and complex in some ways. So we need to start to think about how do we manage this. You've probably seen in the news recently the details around the Solarwinds attack, which happened at the end of last year. Solarwinds is a product that's used in many organisations around the world to help understand networks and things that go on there and monitor them. And it was a product that was used a lot across the US government and many other big Fortune 500 companies around the world. The supply chain there was breached probably about 9-10 months ago now, and a piece of code was inserted into an update for that product, unbeknown to the organisation Solarwinds and to any of the customers. And that update was then pushed out to around 33,000 customers all of whom received that malicious update and essentially had the opportunity for the bad guys to get a backdoor into their networks. Now, these organizations include, US government departments, Fortune 500 companies, and many others. And around 200 of them were believed to be actively then breached and accessed by the malicious users who had done this. So that's just one example of something that hit the news last year, where the supply chain is really key. You need to know what your third parties are doing, specifically where there's software development happening, which is really crucial to autonomous systems. How are they developing that software? But more importantly, how are they going to maintain that environment for you moving forwards? So the day after you take delivery of the new system, the new platform, the new vessel, how do you know that security is going to be maintained with any patching updates or maintenance that needs to happen through that? Making sure that your suppliers understand that process and you've got agreements with what they're going to do and how they're going to manage that for you is really key. And I think that's one thing that we've particularly seen, not just within autonomous vessels, but marine and offshore in particular, that's still very immature. Organizations are beginning to understand how to develop secure software. But the conversation around how to maintain it in an operational lifespan, particularly with all the challenges that being at sea presents, is still an area that needs a lot of focus and a lot of work. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and next slide. Okay, very quickly, just literally 30 seconds on the regulations. There's a whole bunch of different cybersecurity ones in this. You can look at this slide later. It shows what's been taken and put in place from the IMO through national governments, industry bodies, right through to class societies and owner operators. Next slide, please. The IMO have put out some interim guidelines for mass trials, which were published back in 2019. And I think the key thing from there, from a security perspective, is to note that there's an equivalent statement. So in other words, they expect to see at least the same degree of safety, security, and protection of the environment as provided by relevant instruments. So in other words, they're looking for that equivalence. So whatever we do in our autonomous systems, we need to be able to maintain and show that the same levels of safety and security can be implemented within them. And obviously, because of the larger attack surfaces and all of the things that we've been talking about, that does present a challenge for many organisations to consider that. How we manage that risk and what we do about it, there's many things that we can learn from other sectors and other areas where they have been involved in this in times before. I think if we look even at other autonomous areas, you look at the autonomous vehicles and cars, for example, there's lots of things that they've done within that sector that we can probably port across and take and use as we start to develop our autonomous maritime ships and vessels and systems. So that's one area that we can consider. Okay, next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, just to finish with then, I think how do you go about then actually doing this for real? What do we take away? What do we need to be thinking about? What do we need to consider if you're planning to build, implement autonomous systems? There is a journey. So don't jump in at the end game and think we need to have a completely holistic view of our cybersecurity strategy, and we need to have something that is mature. We need to have the best capabilities in place day one. I think if you describe it like a circle, so you're going round different capabilities, you might be able to come up with 5, 6, 7 different cyber capabilities. So your engineering, your monitoring, your detection, your education to your people, your supply chain, and there's loads of different frameworks that you can pull on to pull out those capabilities. But what you're really trying to do is to start with a little bit of everything and gradually mature that over time, both as your understanding develops, but also as your ability to actually do something with that data and that information and those capabilities happens. But doing some form of assessment at the outset to understand, well, what is the impact? Think about it from a threat perspective, understand that so you can build out your risk register and understand, well, what is it that we're actually concerned about? What are we trying to protect ourselves from? What could happen that would be a significant impact upon my vessel and the operations that we're trying to do? As you start to manage those risks, you can then start to think about the controls that you can implement. Again, some organizations jump straight in at the controls and think we need all this techie stuff. But if you don't know why you need the techie stuff, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So always start from the business perspective and understand the threats against you, build out those risk tables, and then think about, well, what controls are needed to actually implement the right levels of protection that we need for ourselves. And you will be different to other people. So do the right things for your organizations. Once you've got that, you can then start to think about the governance, the oversight, the assurance. How do I know these things are effective? How do I know they're actually working? How can I be assured that if the worst case happened, I'd actually be in the right place? You can then start to build out those sorts of things. And then that can lead into a longer term development of a strategy that is appropriate for your organization. So at Lloyd's Register, we've been working on this. We've built out some specific procedures within the class process to manage and understand how cybersecurity can be detailed and assessed within vessels. I won't talk about it today. There are a few extra slides in the pack that you can have a look at later. But if you'd like to talk to us more about that, we can certainly detail that. But we've got some specific sessions that focus there on autonomous vessels and how to approach that if you're looking to either build or implement security within these systems. So I hope that's been helpful. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through cyber, but if anybody has got any questions or comments, observations, I'm happy to take them now. So thank you.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. Is that your last slide? Oh no.
There's a few more slides, but you can cut them off. I think we're out of time, so we can pick that later.
Ah, we've got to a thank you. Okay, we have a question which I'm just going to publish. This is from Amitesh Kubal. He says, you described how the threat surface is expanding all the time and how risks along the supply chain are increasing. Is the IMO's equivalence requirement really sufficient, since we don't know what tomorrow's threats could be? If not, how can this future safety be safeguarded? That's a catch-all question, if ever I heard one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, very good question. I think the very short answer is no. So, you know, if you look at the organisations that operate within the marine and offshore sector, clearly there's a very diverse set of requirements and needs around cybersecurity. So some vessels are operating and, you know, almost don't have an internet connection or potentially a dial-up connection still, right through to the sort of areas we're talking about today, where you've got autonomous vessels which really are operating at the cutting edge of technology, very connected, very interconnected, and you know, lots going on. So I think really, rather than looking to regulation to really drive the conversation in the short term, clearly it needs to be addressed. It needs to be sorted out for the future. The right answer at the moment is to consider this from a business perspective. You're going to get the answers you need for a lot of these things. What do we do? What do we really care about? What's the impact to us that we really should be concerned about, by thinking about it from a business risk perspective? So I'd encourage you to think about it from that perspective. And you're absolutely right. There is more work that's needed on the regulations. Some would argue that it needs to go a lot further. And you know, that's a place and conversation that needs to continue to happen. So I think, and the challenge as well is that, you know, you've got the national and international side of things. Yeah, it's a very complex world, marine offshore, in terms of how we operate, because we're global and because we move across borders, because we've got lots of people who have a stake and an input into this. Sometimes it can be difficult to get a consensus. But I think the key thing here is the collaboration. We need to work together. We need to share knowledge from other sectors and industries. People have done this before, so we're not actually cutting our teeth on something that's brand new. Work has been done in other areas that we can lean on. And we need to try and be as collaborative as possible. But yeah, I'd encourage you to think about it from a business perspective first and foremost.
Ben, thank you very much indeed, and I wholeheartedly agree. It is a business issue, this, and it spans everybody in a company. You've given us a huge sweep across the whole subject of cyber and what it is and what we need to be thinking about, and I'm terribly grateful to you. I've got one favour. If you look at the slide that I've got on screen, I think there's a typo. It's netitude, is it not? In your email?
It is indeed. Well spotted, James. Very good. I will update my my own personal email address there. It's wrong.
So if anybody's writing that down, it is netitude.com. And I'm sorry to highlight it, but otherwise we'll send emails off into the ether and they'll become part of cyber's problem. Listen, Ben, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much indeed. And to you and your colleagues at Netitude within LR, we know you're doing a hell of a good job. And the only thing I wanted to finish off with, and it's a bit of a personal one, it's the MAS Red Group Conference, is that if you look within the new Code of Practice version 4, which you can find, and I'll tell you later where to look for it, there is now a chapter on cyber. It's an early shot at it, and we'll be reviewing that during this coming year. But you cannot ignore the subject. So Ben, thank you very much indeed, and see you soon. Okay.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks. Bye.
And if Amanda's listening, I wonder if we could just prepare for Dan Hook and his talk. Dan, I don't know if you can actually hear me. Are you on the line?
Hi James, good morning. Yes, I'm here.
Great. Many of you will be familiar with Dan Hook. Dan has been in this game probably longer than most of us put together. His CV is up there if you want to read it. But of course, he's been at the front end of driving the whole business of autonomous vessels, MAS, call it what you like. And he's now settled in Ocean Infinity. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Dan, as always, to give us an update on where you see life, as we agreed to call it, to infinity and beyond. So the floor is yours. Away you go. Thanks.
Great. Good morning, and thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Hi. I wish I could say good to see you all on the screen I've got. I can't see so many faces, but I'll trust you're all out there and listening, and hopefully got a warm cup of coffee to hand. Wow, the 6th MAS Regs conference. I don't quite know where time flies, but it's great that we've managed to keep it up and do it remotely. So thanks to James and the team for perseverance and pulling this together. I hope you can all hear me clearly and there isn't an audio back loop. So I want to give you a bit of a presentation. As James said, we went for a slightly funny dress up. I haven't dressed up as Buzz Lightyear or anything, but just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're up to at Ocean Infinity and some comments on sort of the wider industry, how we hope we can help, and certainly keen to keep sort of supporting events like this. This has always been an industry challenge, an industry opportunity. It's more than a business opportunity. It's for all of us. So next slide, please. So I'll give you a very brief intro, a couple of comments on the year, a very quick intro to us, talk about the Armada fleet, the remote control centres, which has been a really sort of interesting topic. I know lots of people in this group have got lots of experience, thoughts, comments around those. So we're keen to hear some questions, and then some words really from me on operational safety and efficiency, and then a few on next steps. So I'll make sure I keep to time and we have plenty of time for questions. So next slide, please. Well, what a year. It's been a weird year. It's passed in a bit of a blur in front of this screen, mainly in different teams things. But despite a funny year with sort of lack of travel opportunities and conference opportunities and getting companies together and teams together to do projects has been tough. The industry hasn't stopped. You know, the MAS industry has continued globally to make progress this year. It hasn't been a slow year for this industry. You know, a massive number of new products, new projects, new things being announced. Even, you know, the last 2 weeks, I think I've seen 4 that I've thought, wow, those are big steps. You know, things are still moving apace. So we should be proud as an industry, I guess, being in the remote technologies world. If we can't use Teams and crack on and Zoom and other things, who can? So we should be proud as an industry of not slowing up. Clearly, the sort of those are noddy drawings, aren't they? Believe it or not, I actually trained as a naval architect at Southampton. I think some of my lecturers would be furious with me, but on that sort of simple diagram there, what I really was showing was, largest sort of historically, the growth area has been sub 24 meters. Really meaning sub 12. I mean, most of the USVs launched over the last decade have been sub 12. Most of the articles, most of the businesses, most of the jobs, most of the employment was in that sort of sub 24, principally sub 12 space. However, in the last year, I think if you went on a sort of a counting of column inches exercise in the magazines and articles, there's probably been more written about projects that are over 24 meters, principally obviously in the US with the MUSV, LUSV programs, ourselves at Oceanography and Armada, what I'll tell you about here. Yesterday we saw things from Reach, earlier in the year we saw things from Fugro. We've seen things from sort of James and Anton on the Zulu Associates. There's companies building on some big things now, and really a lot of progress in this over 24 meter space, which is it is a great area of opportunity, excitement, and challenge. Big interest in robotics in general this year. Remote working, it's been at the top of people's minds, how different industries can progress even with travel restrictions and challenges such as COVID. Being in Teams meetings where one of the participants is a robot is quite a cool experience, and it's something that's becoming quite normal quite quickly. Uncrewed and lean crewed vessels certainly sort of continue to gain momentum and investment. I mentioned there just about sort of some of the sort of projects we've seen out, but they are real projects and not just articles. I'm sure lots of people on this line are involved actually in projects with budgets making progress. Over the years, there's sort of been a bit of a kind of change of possibly who's making some of the biggest leaps forward between commercial and defence. I've sort of seen the baton handed a few times. And I think my own personal opinion over the last sort of year, I've seen this sort of level up. There's actually an awful lot of progress being made in both. I think there's still some huge opportunities to exchange more technology between the two sectors. It's a challenge, obviously, for certain reasons on some of the defence programmes to exchange information, but a lot of potential where I think we can still move faster by working a bit more closely. And then, as per sort of, I guess, a major theme of this conference, I think safe operations remains paramount. I think anyone working in this industry, either as a customer of MAS, a user of MAS, or a developer of MAS, is absolutely aware that safety has to be first, not only for people, but clearly for us as an industry. If we don't keep that first and foremost, we do run the risk of something going wrong, and it could set the industry back a long time. So, personal thanks, I'm sure many of you share it, to the ongoing work of the likes of MAS RWG. Lots of voluntary time goes into it, but it is helping as an industry. So next slide, please. Right, this is going to be very quick from me. Oceanography, you can go and read about it on the website, but really existing to sort of transform operations by sea. A big push on minimising CO2 emissions right from the core of all the shareholders. That is a principal push. Minimising CO2 in the maritime operations going forward, reducing offshore HSE exposure. But people don't want to give on operational excellence and efficiency and quality. They want all three. And to achieve all of those three things takes a different approach, a different view. We're using maritime robotics to try and deliver on those three, principally in the areas of map and inspect and locate, as you might imagine, and you can read a bit about some of the things the company's done there. But more interestingly now, for some of you possibly, moving more into shuttle logistics. So that's a quick overview on the company. Next slide, please. Now, really of interest to this group is the work we're doing with our Armada fleet. So quite an undertaking. I've certainly had a busy year, and there's a big team here at OI that have had a busy year working on the Armada fleet. Grateful to all of them for their work despite the sort of challenges of travel and working from home, all putting in massive hours, and quite excited to share with you some of the progress. So basically building a large fleet at quite a scale of uncrewed and lean crewed vessels. A lot of effort going into efficient electric vessels, and this might be via diesel electric battery hybrid, but also we've got some work going on with fuel cell hybrids, which might interest some of you. and also taking monitoring of emissions, monitoring of fuel usage, planning of missions incredibly seriously, and closely working that into our carbon offset programs. We're involved in a few programs with some large swathes of land at various places in the world where we're undertaking planting. We've got a seagrass initiative underway as well. So quite, yeah, exciting times, a lot happening, and the sort of services we'll be operating in, you're all fully aware of really the opportunities for MAS. I don't need to talk through them. Possibly one that doesn't get mentioned very much is geotechnical. Historically, there's been a lot of work about geophysical surveys with unmanned platforms, pinging the seabed with acoustics and various other sensors and instruments. But geotechnical is a little bit more interactive with the seabed. Some remote drilling and sort of core sampling and measurements of resistance of the seabed. Some quite exciting progress has been made on remote geotechnical survey. I think keep your eyes peeled this coming year in that space, but that's a big market for unmanned systems. So those are the sort of sectors we're in. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is what we're up to. So you'll have seen some of these images before. We've already got a class of 8-meter boats which we continue to run. They're currently doing some jobs off of Delaware on the east coast of the US, possibly mobilising some down to Australia soon. So the small platforms remain a good learning place, a good training place, a good place to build experience with fairly small assets. But we're working away on the construction of some vessels at 21, 36 and 78 metres in length. So we're certainly broaching that below and above 24-metre threshold that's been there for a while. And I think the total came up to 888 metres in total vessel length of what's on order. But we've got the 421s, the 536s, and 8 of those larger 78s on order. And if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to read you through all the tech specs and bore you. This isn't a naval architecture or a detailed robotic engineering conference, but I think one of the things to really look at is probably the deck capacity row. That helps you really think. On our 8 meters, we don't even quote anything because really they just carry sonars and USBLs and GPSs and equipment like that. When you get to a sort of 21-meter boat, it's entirely realistic to put about 13 tons. I think the max that takes about 15 or 16, but you can start to put that sort of weight on board, which is like an ROV spread. It's a sort of small 20-foot container. It's that sort of size. You get up to something about 36 meters in length. The sort of design we're building, clearly you could build something for a heavier displacement, but we've built something that'll take around just over 100 tons on deck. So there you're into large work class ROVs, you're into some of the geotechnical spreads, you're certainly into multiple containers and deck cargo weights. When you move to something at 78 meters in size, you're talking 1,000 tons plus on deck, and you're clearly getting into even larger winches and payloads if it's survey inspection type work you're doing, and likewise if it's payload shuttling, you're talking significantly more weight. Clearly there's the opportunity to put payload below deck as well on the bigger boats. So that maybe helps you think. Meters doesn't always mean much to people. Sometimes when you think weight on deck, that helps scale it. But you can see the images there. Hopefully these slides can get circulated afterwards, and you can read more of the details, and ping me if you want to know more. If anyone wants to geek out on the details, I'm always up for that. But next slide, please. They are in build. Some of these photos are from the yard we're working with in Norway. So we selected a company called GMV up in the far north of Norway. They're building the 21 and 36 meter boats, and those sort of photos there show various stages of progress. The first ones are sort of flipped over and due to actually go into sort of final fit out and paint fairly soon. And then we're working with Vard, which is probably well known to lots of you for larger offshore construction vessels, large sort of specialist yachts, part of the Fincantieri group, a large shipbuilder, working with Vard on the 78 meter boats, and they'll be using yards in Vietnam and support in Norway. So that's the sort of the progress. It's happening. I'll certainly share more photos and videos as the year progresses. Next slide, please. So, building boats is one thing. Designing boats, adding extra layers of redundancy and reliability and electronic monitoring, extra sensors, cameras, radars, LiDAR, the rest. That's one challenge. And as an industry, we've got a lot of experience of that. There's a lot of unmanned boats out there at different sizes, and the boat challenge, certainly to me, was something we're well into, and I'd say is a fairly low risk activity now. What is probably was a higher risk activity, because there was less knowledge around, was how you design and build a remote operations, remote control, call it what you will, center. There's always I accidentally sometimes keep defaulting back to ROC. I've gone with remote control center for this package. I'm sure a few people smiling in the audience on what we call it. But you can see on the left, that's quite a cavernous space. That's actually in a new building in Woolston in Southampton. So for any of you with a sort of Royal Navy background or just general interest in shipbuilding may well have known the Vosper Thornycroft Yard. Large number of successful vessels, ships, warships built at Vosper Thornycroft Yard in Woolston. And that's where this site is. And actually the size of this building, you can just see, depending on your screen resolution, a gentleman standing on the left by the wall. So there's actually somebody standing up over there on the left. It gives you a feel of the sort of scale of that room, and all of that room is being converted into the rendering you see on the right. So it's a pretty large space. I'm sure there are some others out there, and people building different types of control centers in different industries for different things, but I've certainly been on a steep learning curve. And if maybe you could go to the next slide, please. Just shows a few more images. So the centre's being built initially in Southampton on that Woolston site, but we also have plans for additional centres in Austin and Singapore for various reasons. A, to sort of facilitate regional support. I think going forward, especially in the first few years, maybe even decade of operations, I think people are going to expect some level of regional people involved. So whether it's for local support, whether it's for meetings, whether it's opportunities for national coast guards to visit, whatever it may be, we've kind of concluded that we will need multiple centres around the world. It gives us some sort of opportunities for things like sort of chasing the sunset type operations, we've called it, but maximising the use of daylight hours to sort of make some efficient staffing options for certain projects. But also, and probably most importantly to me, is redundancy. So in each of the buildings themselves, the one in Southampton, we have redundant fibre optic connections coming way back from a distant location to the building. We have redundant generators, we have redundant UPS backups, we have redundant server rooms. We've done everything we possibly can in that single building to add redundancy layers. However, you can still have an event, and I remember, I think Bernard Toomey and some others pointing this out several years back at one of these events. The challenge always, what about a fire alarm? What about flooding? What about some local problem that affects that building? You can't have a fleet at sea that's then unsupervised. So there will be redundant control centres in other buildings. How we move control between them, how we assure commonality of training and operations, these are all challenges that face us. The centres are going to facilitate sort of navigation, planning, training for all of those classes of vessels I just showed you, but also remotely operated vehicles, tethered ROVs underwater, AVs, remote geophys, remote geotech. They're going to be quite sort of multi-role centres. It's been a long design process. I've learned a lot. We've had quite an exciting sort of, I always like the design approach people take on these big engineering projects is a bit of a sort of fascination of mine. It's been really interesting on this particular one to watch how commercial operators, some used to being on the bridge, some used to being in control rooms for cruise ships on shore, others used to being in submarines and warships, how they all come together and view what operations really means and how you do it safely and effectively. Some want noise, some want quiet, some want light, some want dark, some want small rooms, some want big rooms, some want cold rooms, some want warm rooms, some want windows, some want no windows. It's been a real interesting process going through that with a big team. We did bring in some external help. We did have some ergonomics experts and a couple of different consultants come in to sort of guide us through this process. And I'm really pleased with where we've got to. Obviously, you've seen the centre in build. You can see these renders that show you a pretty good idea of what's coming together. We're building a sort of subset of it. We've got a temporary workshop down in Hythe, also near Southampton, where we're just building a couple of the stations up for trials before we build out what I think is going to be a total of 24 stations in that building. So we are doing it in a little few steps. Next slide, please. So sorry for so many words on a page, but I thought with everyone working from home close to their screens, they can probably read and think as quickly as I can talk. So I hope you don't mind that approach. I've titled it Operational Safety and Efficiency, and trying to set some high standards. I think we all are in this industry. It's a sort of a good common sort of plus point I've seen in this industry. You know, normally we're all having a chat over coffee before and after these sessions, and my general kind of vibe from this industry is trying to do it right, trying to set high standards. You do go to some other industries and the talk is all about doing it cheaper, quicker, faster. What can we offshore? How can we get this done differently? So a couple of sort of notes. Katrina from the MCA presented earlier. Ongoing sort of good working relationship with the MCA. Honest, open, transparent about the challenges that lie ahead. Let's bite them off one at a time and work through it. So thank you to the support there, and it's great to see the MCA sort of reorganising and restructuring, and the Futures Group is a great help to work with on that. And we're building a management system that's in line with sort of full statutory compliance. And as James said, and he gave, thanks James, he always does a very nice intro for me and makes me go a bit red. But I have been working with these unmanned boats for quite a long time, about 20 years now. Certainly in the early stages of unmanned boat USV operations, we weren't thinking ISM, ISPS. We weren't engaging with oil and gas and OCIMF and all of the others. There has been a massive maturing of how we tackle some of these topics. And you might have the best unmanned boat, the best software, the best ideas for how you're going to run it, but if you don't have sort of statutory compliance and management systems in place, you won't be running it for long in the 2020s. A lot of work on operational safety case development and related hazard identifications with DNVGL. Worked sort of closely with DNVGL on this program. We recruited somebody who knew a lot more about this stuff than I did or any of the others on the team. So Andy Holt has joined us. He's a master mariner with sort of extensive ship management experience at some of the bigger vessel operators. He's joined us to sort of run this rollout of operational safety and efficiency for MAS. A chief vessel operator, Anne, has joined us. I think some of you might have started to meet her through the MAS Regs group. Loads of energy for this, loads of ideas. Training and situational awareness skills, proving competence. You can train people. You can certainly sit them through lectures and exercises and exams, but proving their competence at operating things remotely is a hot topic. It's an interesting area of work. And we've decided to actually dedicate a training ship. So one of the Armada fleet will be dedicated to training, running out of Southampton. Initial roles, I'm running out of time a little, so I'll rattle through, but what we're actually sort of seeing it almost as like an evolution of shore position roles. We've had some great CVs come through. We've been doing some great interviews, meeting some really interesting people that want to work in the maritime industry, want to be in command of vessels, want to be involved in navigation, but maybe for various family reasons or other can't go to sea anymore. So I'm really excited actually about this sort of this remote operations centre, remote control centre, and the sort of diversity it's going to bring into the sector. Next slide, please. Couple more notes. Not going to reinstate too much about cyber. You've just had a presentation on that, but cyber has always been the topic where you can be having a fantastic customer meeting talking about robots, remote operations, low CO2, cutting the number of people offshore. The meeting goes really, really, really well. And then someone raises the topic of cyber, and everyone looks at each other and scratches their head and thinks about it and says, oh yes, we're working on that. We're using good industry standards. And there's not been good convincing answers, in my opinion, that anyone's really got it fully thought through. And I'm not saying we have either. So what I've done is we have recruited some specialists into the team. When we looked at where cybersecurity expertise was, it wasn't historically in maritime. So we've recruited actually a lead who's joined us from the US Air Force, where I thought there was and think there is a lot of experience. I mean, he's currently sort of building a team around him of analysts and experts that all work to use where we can commercially available off-the-shelf tools, but I suspect there's going to be some development going on. Systems engineering, this is a given. I've heard it referred to more recently as the illities of reliability and predictability and maintainability. Without that, you'll risk quite literally being dead in the water. So we've had a new person join, taking that very seriously. And as you read through the MASREG's Code of Practice, all of these topics link up. When you start to do diagrams of interfaces, this all links together. I talked about remote control center development. I'll keep you posted as that progresses. I've always been an advocate of the sort of crawl, walk, run approach, and I don't think I've done many presentations where I haven't put that somewhere. But still, to me, it's one of the best ways of just opening a conversation about gradual, careful steps, but with an ambitious goal. So we certainly are planning to use guard vessels in our initial operations on the larger boats, the 36s and 78s. They'll start out lean crewed with people on board. However, there is an absolute clear goal. There is a clear focus. Anyone that joins the company, anyone who's involved in this project, our goal is an uncrewed future. We do want to be operating as many of these vessels and applications as possible from that remote control center without people at sea. We need a clear focus goal. And I think all those points are really summarized by the fact that we, the company, anyone involved, put safety as #1 priority. If there's anything that's gonna knock us off, it would be not having that as priority. I'm running out of time, so my next slide, please, and then I'm done. Voluntary standards, you're all aware of those. Thank you for those that are involved in updating and producing and maturing those. Keep going. Next slide, please. Thank you for those there. Great support. Southampton Open Spring Summer. I look forward to hopefully being able to show you some of you around in person. Deliveries of boats, deployments, recruitment, operational procedures, discussions with more national bodies is a key one. I'm sure there'll be talk of that throughout the conference, but setting up a business like this that can only operate in 1 or 2 countries is clearly never going to work. Big international push on all of this. Yeah, and some exciting announcements coming on growth and services. This is a great project to be involved in. I'm a lucky man. So there you go. I'm going to finish. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to present James and the MASREG's group.
Dan, thank you very much indeed. There isn't much time left, but there is a little. One quick question. Can you in 1 minute summarize how you see RCCs interacting with VTS centres, please?
I wish I had Andy and Hans. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep, great. I wish I had Andy and Anne sitting right next to me. It's a good topic. I wish all the VTSs ran on the same software. I think there'd be some really exciting opportunities for clever links. Having to do interfaces to lots and lots of different VTS softwares is not something that's scalable. So a pure tech fit isn't going to solve it in the short term. So at the moment for us, it's just meeting with them and good old-fashioned human-to-human interaction, local comms links, local radio links. Clearly, with Southampton, you know, we've got one to start working with right on our doorstep. But yeah, a tough question and a tough challenge. They're all quite different. They're all running different software. They're all running different approaches. It's not a quick software patch to have a great interaction, I'm afraid.
We might have a look further into that in the panel session coming up a bit later on. I'm going to park a question from Roly Rogers, which is all about port state control and inspection over masts and their associated RCCs, because that is a huge subject. Again, we might tackle that in the panel. But to finish your session, Dan, somebody anonymously has asked, when do we see a 22,000 TEU autonomous vessel to match increasingly automated container yards? Or the suggestion is, will autonomy only ever work on short sea immediate delivery routes? How do you see that?
Well, you know me, and hopefully I've had a chance to meet quite a lot of the people viewing. I am an optimist. I am a believer. I'm a technologist. To kind of keep going at this pace, I think you have to be in this industry. So I'm a believer that it's coming. There's no doubt some challenges. I could list lots of them. People listening here could list even more than I can. I'm not naive to say it's going to be quick or easy. But it's, in my view, it's certainly doable. It's certainly going to happen. I'm working as hard as I can to it. Lots of others are, but I suspect we're going to see some big ships, much bigger than 78 meters, running quite safely before this decade's out. I hope sooner than the end of the decade.
I hope Henrik Tunfalls and co are listening to that message. Dan, thank you as always. You know, you're bringing so much to the party through your new OI and Armada projects, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to follow up with what you've said. So thank you very much indeed. I think we'll leave it there. We'll have a very short pause before we set up for what is the final session before we break for coffee, ho-ho, which will not be virtual for me. And so, Dan, thank you. And if the producer, if Amanda could set up, please, for Danielle Berrenbaum and her colleague Giles, I'd be very grateful. Okay. My next speaker today is a lady called Danielle Berrenbaum, and she's brought with her her colleague Dr. Giles Howard. I met Danielle on a virtual conference, and she's got a lot of really interesting things to offer, and the title she agreed to talk about was the challenges of autonomous platforms in the maritime domain. And Danielle and Giles, I'll leave you two to tell us more, please. I hope that works.
Okay, I assume you can hear me okay?
Yep. Fine.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much for that, James. So good morning, everyone. As James said, my name is Danielle Berrenbaum, and I'm being joined by my colleague, Dr. Giles Howard. We both work for L3 Harris Maps in Bristol, and today we'd like to share with you our presentation with you on the challenges of autonomous platforms in the maritime domain. Next slide, please. Historically, operators on board a vessel would be responsible for the local control of a ship's hydraulic, mechanical and electrical systems. These operators would work together as part of an overarching control structure to maintain control of the whole vessel. Looking to the present day, this scene is changing quite considerably. Advances in automation has allowed vessels to incorporate highly sophisticated solutions. These include things such as the integrated bridge and navigation systems, real-time integrated platform management systems, and combat management systems, all of which reducing the reliance on operator control. These solutions have not only enabled the development of lean manning solutions, but also introduced benefits such as sensor fusion and the improved reaction times of automatic responses and behaviours. Automation is not the final goal, however. A vessel which is autonomous is the next step. In this shift, the level of involvement from the operator is reduced and the platform's decision-making ability and authority is increased. These changes highlight new challenges within the maritime industry, and with this presentation, we examine some of the main roadblocks and how looking to other industries, such as the automotive industry, may provide a bit of inspiration as to the solution. Can I have the next slide, please? One of these main roadblocks is achieving assurance for autonomous vessels. Assuring the safety of the vessel is of paramount importance to both the operators and the regulators within the maritime domain. Currently, existing standards and techniques present their own issues. Safety on autonomous platforms not only has to consider safety in the presence of failures, but also safety in the absence of failures. And this shift of approach is, it's a different way of looking at things, and it's not very well covered just yet. Cybersecurity, which obviously has been covered in quite a bit of detail already this morning, becomes another consideration, as an increase in sensors and data sources on board an autonomous ship mean that there are more instances of potential data compromises. In such a scenario, not only can this cause accidents via wrong actions, but also enable the platform to serve as a launch pad for further attacks. It's important to look at the interplay between security and safety on board these autonomous vessels to ensure that both of these properties are managed with equal respect and that neither has the opportunity or the potential to compromise the other. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. These assurance challenges are not to be taken lightly, as we all know. Each one requires a lot of attention from stakeholders in the maritime industry to fully appreciate their complexity and help facilitate progress. To do this, like I mentioned earlier, we might find it helpful to look to other industries like the automotive industry to see how they have dealt with their own challenges faced in the transition from automated to autonomous platforms. In doing this, we may be able to identify key milestones and outputs required to enable the definition, classification, and the all-important assurance of autonomy. An awareness of this process, of how this process has been achieved, within other industries, may provide an indication of the areas of which to focus our efforts, and therefore allow the essential frameworks and standards to be defined more rapidly with agreement across the industry. Next slide, please. Like the maritime industry, there are many other domains in which autonomous platforms are being increasingly deployed. I've got a few of them on the slide there for you. For this presentation, we'll look specifically at the automotive industry to provide guidance on the approach to assurance. This is because the automotive industry has a relatively mature set of frameworks which have enabled the platforms to be categorized and described in a common language, and the benefits of which Giles will discuss very shortly. This level of maturity can also be said for the assurance standards within the automotive domain, something which is ever increasing. The automotive industry also presents a similar set of consequences to the failure of correct autonomous behaviours. These include collisions and ultimately loss of life, and mean that the severity and impact of anything incorrect or going wrong is of similar magnitude. Next slide, and I'll pass you over to Giles for a little bit now.
Thank you, Danielle. So we took quite an extensive look at the development of autonomous platforms in the automotive domain as part of kind of producing this presentation and a paper that also went to INEC last year. And one of the key things that stands out about the automotive domain at the moment is everyone has kind of consolidated around the SAE J3016 framework, which defines kind of large swaths of terminology, as well as an algorithm for the classification of autonomous systems, and also has some kind of relatively detailed worked examples of, you know, when something would fall from a level 5 to a level 4, and kind of also the other way. So that was a key thing that stood out to us when we were looking at lessons learned from the automotive domain, is that creates quite a powerful tool for communication and understanding, because there is that unified single terminology to define all of the aspects of the autonomy. So the operational design domain and the object event detection and response is a key set of terminology. I understand as well that in the Maritime UK framework there are similar terms, so that's obviously fantastic. There's also that straightforward algorithm for the classification of autonomous platforms. And then the other thing that's clearly happened in the automotive domain that is key to emphasise is the development of assurance standards for the kind of here and the now of autonomous platforms in that domain, and also looking towards the future, the more robust type of safety cases and security standards that will be required to successfully deliver and get regulatory approval for kind of truly autonomous systems where an operator is not regularly interceding or having to interrupt the behaviour of the autonomous platform. Next slide, please. So I'm not seeing if the slide has updated. Oh yeah, there we go. So I think another key area that the autonomous automotive domain currently has, which is very interesting, is metrics. So there has been a lot of emphasis on the development of meaningful metrics that can be both kind of honestly represented by developers of the systems and also understood by regulators. So these are broadly broken down. There's a RAND study that I've referenced on the slide that everyone's welcome to go have a look at. Broadly, there are a lot of qualitative metrics, such as concepts such as roadmanship, which is you kind of run an autonomous car down a closed course or on an open street, and people kind of subjectively score how they feel the car is driving. Is it stopping very frequently? Does it seem to randomly kind of oscillate between certain speeds? That obviously is not a very robust way of looking at it, both from a kind of trying to sell your autonomous platform and build consumer confidence, but also from the regulator side, I imagine trying to judge an autonomous platform on roadmanship and that be the sole judge of whether a platform is appropriate to launch onto the market is probably not going to be successful. But there have been several areas of quantitative metric development, such as miles per disengagement, which is where a disengagement is kind of any instance where either the autonomous system sort of essentially gives up and says, I don't really know what to do here, so I'll hand back to the experienced operator that's behind the wheel, or where the operator believes the autonomous platform is going to make an incorrect decision that will jeopardize the safety of the platform, and therefore the operator intercedes and takes over kind of essentially immediately. There are other metrics too. Cumulative mileage under autonomous operation is one that gets banded around a lot by system developers. You'll see kind of Tesla and Uber will produce those metrics and shout about them a lot, of how many hundreds of thousands of miles or millions of miles have been driven under autonomous operation. And there are also kind of other quantitative metrics such as infractions, which I don't think are popularized as much, but are probably of much more interest to regulators in trying to judge whether these platforms are safe for use on public roads. Obviously, an infraction being anything that would violate, say, the highway code in this country or similar codes of practice for, similar legislative rules for driving in other nations. And of course, that has culminated in these kind of conversations where people are proposing that potentially we will need some kind of driving test, which can be objectively measured through, a number of miles without an infraction, or an infraction rate that is on par, if not better than a human driver would be in kind of ideal conditions. So in Maritime, I appreciate the the autonomous development is slightly earlier along, but for everyone involved, it may be worth looking at those metrics and developing an equivalent voluntary set that can be used to meaningfully measure the performance of autonomous maritime platforms. Obviously, there is a material difference between the two domains in that maritime crews are highly trained, well certified and well regulated in a way that perhaps you could argue people driving cars are not. There is substantially less documentation required and substantially less training. So potentially, as soon as you employ those metrics, the bar is going to be much higher in maritime, of course. Next slide, please. So obviously the IMO have their mass framework for the categorization of the 4 degrees of autonomy. The Maritime UK framework kind of expands on that and also has the levels of control definitions, and that's fantastic. That obviously means that broadly maritime is where automotive are in terms of people are thinking about these and elaborating robust codes that can be used to classify systems. Of course, unfortunately, the Maritime UK is not the only framework out there. It is probably by far the most developed. And while you still have that proliferation of multiple frameworks, it can be difficult for people to position their platforms both from a development perspective and also from a regulatory perspective in terms of articulating assurance expectations. Next slide, please. And of course, the only other area that we particularly found impressive, I suppose, from the automotive domain in terms of their autonomous platform assurance was the 2 streams almost in parallel of assurance standards that are currently being developed. So if you look, there are standards such as the BSI 21448, which is explicitly limiting itself to a maximum of, I believe, level 3 on the SA autonomy framework. So those are driver assist systems, and they are very clear that that standard is only for the assurance of systems in which there is still a skilled driver present who is primarily in control of the platform. There's then this parallel stream of development going on where you have much more robust and much more, some would argue, onerous safety standards being developed, such as UL 4600, which are great tomes of hundreds of pages, but they articulate pretty much every lesson that we have learned in functional safety over the past 60 years, and they enumerate those expectations almost in a kind of checklist form, that your safety case should contain key categories, what should be in those categories, etc. And those kind of standards are clearly targeted towards the higher autonomy levels, so level 4 and level 5, where you can no longer necessarily fall back on there's a skilled operator behind the wheel ready to take over. You may not have that available to you, or you may be looking to essentially get rid of that skilled operator. You may be looking for the platform to be truly autonomous. And so I guess the lesson learned for maritime is while we don't have those 2 streams of standards, so the standards for the here and now and the standards for the future, more autonomous, more dynamic systems, you end up doing a lot of very bespoke safety cases and security cases, and that creates a lot of risk on both sides, both in terms of regulators accepting and certification bodies accepting that the platform is sufficiently safe, and also from a developer system design perspective. Obviously, you always want to avoid highly bespoke safety arguments. You'd rather comply with a defined safety standard. So hopefully that was an interesting insight. I will hand back to my colleague Danielle to talk about technology implications.
Thank you very much, Charles. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so far we've looked at the automotive industry to provide almost some guidance, some inspiration at how we might achieve this assurance in the maritime domain, but we also need to consider the differences in technology implications, for example, when you compare the 2 industries. Due to security, maritime autonomous vessels do not have the high bandwidth connectivity that would otherwise be required for a reliable stream of information. This means the vessels will need considerably more onboard intelligence to deal with any low bandwidth or connection outage incidents. You can also look at the scale differences between these two. Looking at maritime autonomous vessels, the response time is much greater than that of a modern car. The prime movers involved in the control of a larger vessel can take an order of seconds to respond to a change in demand, which in turn means meeting that required demand can actually take minutes. When you then compare that to a car, for example, that length of time is much greater, which in itself is not an issue. But when you consider the autonomy and the need to predict the behaviour of nearby vessels, you'll have to do this over a much longer duration than you would for autonomous automobiles. There is also the case of reliability. The period of time expected for fault-free operation is a matter of weeks for an autonomous vessel compared to that of days for an automobile. This is due to the length of time the vessel will be operational for at a time, especially if the ship is intended to be away from port for a significant period. This means that the reliability has to be much higher for maritime vessels than it does for automotive, increasing the complexity of the system. Next slide, please. The comparison between the automotive and maritime domain raises many key points, all of which need to be considered carefully before we can achieve a unified process for assurance. Like Giles mentioned, a common language taken from a single point of reference would enable the definition of a single autonomy framework and a code of practice, and it would allow stakeholders to discuss autonomous maritime systems in a meaningful and consistent manner. In achieving this common language, the assurance of autonomous platforms against both safety and security standards will become much simpler, helped by the adoption of the standard metrics, as Giles mentioned earlier, which will help assess current generation autonomous platforms. Using the automotive industry as an insight helps define the process and the roadmap to assurance. However, you still have to consider the differences in the technology implications discussed, which means that the approach taken cannot be exactly the same. It has to be developed and sort of suited more towards the maritime industry. By developing and defining these assurance metrics, future autonomous platforms should reach assurance in a convincing and timely manner. Next slide, please. I think we've actually come to the end. Welcome any questions that anybody has. Finished nice and early, so you can have a long coffee break.
No, more questions. And we've got a few waiting, and I'm just going to put a few up here. Let me just do that. And thank you very much. I always find it hugely useful to take our head out of the maritime scene and look at what others are actually doing. The first question comes from Phil Buckley. How's the work going to address the performance of automated vessels in the presence of crewed, peopled vessels, assuming that they are more likely to make irrational mistakes, which follows up on the IMO stats of human engagement in maritime issues? Do you have a view on that?
So I'm not 100% following the kind of the development in automotive. I know the view from the regulatory bodies are that broadly they don't want to put a car on the road that is less safe than a human driver, but obviously in an autonomous platform in its general behaviour is much more defensive. Some might say that your average driver who tends to be a bit more assertive in certain situations, I think that is what contributes, I guess, negatively to some of the perception of the roadmanship of current generation. I think broadly Tesla claim that their autopilot system is about level 4, but I think we've all seen footage of their cars kind of halting randomly and perceiving obstacles when there aren't any. I'm not sure that's a particularly well solved problem, and I think the current solution that's being broadly adopted is for the platform to behave much more defensively and halt much more regularly if it isn't 100% sure on a peopled vessel's or vehicle's intentions. I'm not kind of 100% sure beyond that whether any particular group has solved the issue.
Okay, I think the key here is the work at sea rather than on land. But it's an interesting question that I'm sure some people will want to pursue. Patrick Pokgraven from the Netherlands says, to qualify the performance autonomous systems and navigation assistance systems, it's essential that there's common agreement on key performance indicators. And he asks of you, are you familiar with the CAPE project of Marin, M-A-R-I-N, that aims to cope to a collision avoidance performance evaluation system? So this is really related to the previous question. It has similarities with the roadmanship from the automotive sector. Are either of you familiar with the CAPE project by any chance? I'm not, personally. Okay. Patrick, if you're listening, you might like to post something separately on that. And then there's a question here about measuring safety, success and safety, miles per disengagement, etc., great metrics. How much of this can be developed using simulators rather than trials at sea, which could take many years? Have you given any thought to that? It's an often asked question about what you can do in a simulator rather than taking real ships out to sea.
I think they've been, and again, I can speak for automotive. I guess the considerations for autonomous vessels, mass is a slightly different one. But my understanding is that they are used extensively on the prior to the kind of the deployment of the vehicles on private land, which is obviously less regulated and is kind of just up to the landlord as to whether they're happy to let autonomous cars drive around. I envision for vessels probably the use of high fidelity simulators is probably going to be critical to get those first safety arguments out the door to say that, okay, well, we've simulated a large number of obstacles on sensors and we've seen the correct behavior in a simulated prime mover. I think this is an area as well that the digital twins and the work that's going on in general in model-based systems engineering could really add to. Obviously, it's no substitute for actual sea trials and trying these things out in limited and controlled ways initially, but I think it would be a useful support and addition to anyone who's trying to argue that those limited trials plus a large amount of simulator work is enough to then broaden the trials and use them in more scenarios. Okay,
I've just put a question up. What feedback have you received regarding the so-called common language approach, specifically from the Coast Guard agencies, so the flag states, class societies or marine autonomy developers? It's such a huge subject and engages in every discussion I go to, whether it's ISO or whatever. Do you have any view on, I mean, you talked about needing a common language, but do you believe there is a route to that?
So I think from reading the Maritime UK Code of Practice and other codes of practice, there seems to be a beginning to unify on the common language. I mean, I saw that the Maritime UK Code of Practice uses the term dynamic navigation task, which is a clear parallel to the one that's used in automotive. And I think to some extent that the literature people are adopting common terms that are being used in other domains, obviously not just automotive, although that was the focus of this presentation, but also aerospace is using some unified terminology now as well, as I believe are rail. So I think I guess it comes down to people voluntarily complying with these. The more people that voluntarily comply with these codes of practice and start to adopt this terminology, the more it will become a commonly used language and people will frame the discussion in that language. Personally, I'd love to hear from Lloyd's or another certification society on this, because I imagine they're probably keen for people to start using unified terminology as well.
They certainly are. I've just published a load of questions. We haven't got time to take them all. I'm just trying to... Are we not in danger of setting the bar so much higher than that for crewed vessels? The majority of accidents at sea are caused by humans. The same applies for automotive. If the driving test was set to the same level that driverless cars have to achieve, no one would ever pass, says Ralph Dodds. As a payoff line, do you want to comment on that, either of you, Danielle?
I mean, the potential is there, yes, but both of these systems have similar implications when things go wrong. So I think you have to treat them both with the same sort of level of respect. Because if things do go wrong, it can be just as catastrophic, if not more. Yes, there might not be the people on board that vessel, but you don't know what these other vessels are like. If this ends up in a collision with another vessel because the autonomous one hasn't acted quick enough, or it has just acted incorrectly, then you could be putting the lives of people on this other vessel at danger. It could be a collision with land. It's not as black and white as, the risk on that vessel isn't as high. So should we be putting it to such a high standard? I think it's still required, just because of the implications from a bigger picture.
Okay, I'm going to draw this session to a close, because I'm sure most people are ready for a leg stretch and to leap to the kettle. But you've put a really interesting perspective on things that we all corporately need to be thinking about and considering. And many of you who know me well will know that I'm a great believer in the multimodal story, and it's important that we learn from what others are doing. There are a number of questions that I've now published which I haven't had time to ask, but there will be a panel session at the end of this morning at 12:45, led by Bob Sanguinetti, and maybe he can pick up on a few of those. But Danielle and Giles, thank you both very much indeed for what you've given us this morning. Really, really interesting, and I'm extremely grateful. If we were all here, I'd ask for a round of applause, but metaphorically, virtually, you can have a round.
Thank you very much.
It's now a time for some coffee. We're bang on time. I think you probably have to go to the VCM button and log back in and rejoin. But we've got quarter an hour, and then we've got Sean Pribble, who's going to give us a view on maritime legal considerations. And as always, I know he's going to give a very fascinating insight into thinking, not just in the States, but in the much wider maritime regulatory legal framework. So let's break for coffee, and I'll see you in 10 minutes or so. Thank you all very much.